worked. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to AMEJA's. Oh, I don't know if this is working. Here we go, testing. Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to fix the welcome to AMEJA's. Oh, I don't know if this is working. Here we go, testing. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us. My name is Mahtis Keshavarz. I'm a board member with the Arab and Middle Eastern Journalists Association. We are an organization based here all over the world in New York, Los Angeles, and other countries. And we are quite pleased and happy today to welcome one of our members, Lara Setrakian, with us for a critical conversation about current events. Lara is a co-founder and executive director of the award-winning digital media startup News Deeply. Prior to establishing News Deeply, she has spent 5 years as a foreign correspondent covering the Middle East for ABC News and Bloomberg Television. Living up to Time magazine's description of her as the future of news, Lara's work has driven comprehensive reportage around the Syrian civil war, Ebola outbreak, the future of water, the Arctic, global refugee crisis, the Inclusion Hub, and the Women and Girls Hub. She has been named one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business and one of Inc. magazine's 7 women who could own the future. She is a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a longtime member of the Arab and Middle East Journalists Association, and currently is residing in Yerevan, Armenia, where she has been reporting on the current crisis with Azerbaijan. And full disclosure, I have the pleasure of calling her my longtime friend. So Lara, welcome to this AMEJA conversation, and thank you so much for taking time out at such a critical and challenging time. So our goal today is to do 2 things. One, unlike many of our AMEJA events, this one is open to the public, and we've invited a lot of people to come and join in. And it sets it apart because many of those joining really have no grounding in the conflict. I may be, to an extent, one of those people. So I would love to begin today's conversation with you giving us a bird's eye view of this conflict for audiences who are unfamiliar with what's going on and why. So if we can start there, we'll
I mean, it may seem like this thing came out of nowhere and actually broke through a lot of other things happening in the world to get a sort of flashes of coverage over the past week, which is pretty remarkable. It's a kind of story where it's really, really important to start it at the right place in the very, very beginning. You know, for hundreds of years, these are people who did live side by side. Armenians, Azeris, sometimes they, all by sort of in different parts of this region when it was very, very integrated in terms of ethnicities and religions. Starting in 1905, then on to the early 1920s with the start of the Soviet Union, you saw a really remarkable rise in nationalism from both Azeris and Azerbaijanis, Azerbaijanis and Armenians. And so as the Soviet Union started to put lines down in the sand and sort of deciding where one republic started and another republic ended, it was an express policy of Joseph Stalin himself, who was responsible for this region and the minority issues. It was a choice to take these majority people X little section of the world and put it in Republic Y. And not just Armenian enclaves put in Soviet Azerbaijan, but all across the Soviet Union, doing this so that basically you had, it was a bit for nefarious purposes. It wasn't for peace and harmony, but rather so that every republic was a little bit off balance in terms of its own nationalism or its own ethnic identity. And so, I have done these fascinating interviews with Azerbaijani voices, some of them who remember very well the time before the collapse of the Soviet Union, where they, as Azerbaijanis, would travel into Nagorno-Karabakh, especially there's a lot of deep cultural affinity, cultural history for Azerbaijanis in Shusha, one of the cities of Nagorno-Karabakh. And so there was a sort of open flow throughout the Soviet period until about 1987, 1988, things started to get really dicey. Mikhail Gorbachev tells everyone in the Soviet Union, now it's going to be more liberal and open and you can express yourselves more freely. And so this majority Armenian enclave, Nagorno-Karabakh, took that as a cue to start petitioning to be reassigned to Soviet Armenia or to be independent itself. And so they took that sort of opening. They launched petitions. They had grassroots movements. They took a vote in their version of the parliament in 1987, and then a referendum in 1991 declaring independence. Throughout that time, sort of mid to late 80s until the early 1990s, the interethnic tension spiraled out of control. Partly in a way, many say prompted by that opening, prompted by that move toward independence, sort of just breaking the equilibrium. So you had instances of Azeris being killed, instances of Armenians being killed, and then eventually, and really by the hundreds of thousands, these weren't little small skirmishes. They were throughout Soviet Azerbaijan and around Nagorno-Karabakh. And so then in 1992, all of these Soviet republics by then have basically become modern countries. And everybody pretty much kept the lines that the Soviets drew for them. Pretty much every republic, including Armenia, including Azerbaijan, legally became the same lines, the same borders that they were given by the Soviet Union 70 some years before. And so you had this really destabilized region. A very bloody war broke out from 1992 to 1994 over what would happen to this little piece of land, Nagorno-Karabakh, smaller than the size of Connecticut. At the time of the end of the Soviet Union, about 140,000 Armenians, about 50,000 Azerbaijanis. So you really had this minority within Azerbaijan, and then a minority Azerbaijani population within this enclave that was majority Armenian. So really, really tough. You had what was essentially an unofficial and very, very bloody population exchange where hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis left their homes from Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding areas during the war. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians leaving Baku after pogroms there, and frankly, no one feeling welcome anymore in a place that wasn't fully 100% ethnically contiguous. Is that an easy way to understand? Harder.
And also to say that much of this is coming on the tail end of the Armenian genocide, which,
didn't help. Yeah, certainly didn't. It definitely gave everyone in this region of Armenian extraction a sense of survival and desperation. The Armenian Republic was made out of a lot of barefoot refugees coming over from Eastern Turkey. And so there is a deep-seated sense of pain and trauma and also being wronged. And so what Azerbaijan and Turkey being very close allies, very close culturally connected, especially now there's a very strong sort of revival of a pan-Turkic movement uniting Turkey and Turkic cultured and Turkic speaking countries all the way to, frankly, the western regions of China, to the Uyghur pop. So that's an incredible historical, anthropological thing. I mean, Uyghurs I don't speak Turkish, I hope to learn it someday, but from what I understand, Uyghurs and Turks in modern Turkey can understand one another more linguistically. This is a really powerful cultural sweep. And so you could see how the affinity certainly between Turkey and Azerbaijan, and this sense by Armenians that they are stuck in the middle, literally, and that every majority ethnic Armenian population that's ever become part of Turkey or that's become part of Azerbaijan, they feel that they have basically been erased, both in terms of human lives and their own cultural legacy. I was reading, and that being said, that just gives them even more of an emotional charge to what's happened.
So, and when we talk about now what's happened most recently, what is the status of what's happened, and I want to kind of get an idea of where we're at now. And then I want to ask you some questions, because I know that you're straddling a few lines here of sensitivities and challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So 1994, the war paused. It was a ceasefire, but not a permanent settlement of the issue. And so Armenians who had basically gone from being 75% to 100% because not of their own will, all the Azerbaijanis left. So it's become now this pretty much Armenian little dot within Azerbaijan, plus a bunch of surrounding areas to connect to modern Armenia, have been under Armenian control. And that has been a real thorn in the side for Azerbaijan as a government, and certainly for people, very emotional. So over the course of 30 years, this has been an incredible pain point for Azerbaijan and for people in Azerbaijan, both those who lost their homes, and then I think symbolically for the whole of the country. You know, Azerbaijan's also, it's been, the Aliyev family really rose to political prominence in 1964. Haidar Aliyev was one of the senior most ranking members of the KGB at the time. You know, they've been around, they've seen the long arc of this issue, that's for sure. And so it has really been one of their priorities as a government for a very long time to you know, establish and make permanent Azerbaijani dominance in this region. For Armenians, those same 30 years were spent building what they call the Republic of Artsakh. I, as a journalist, refer to it as Nagorno-Karabakh. I don't personally believe in the politics of renaming places, but you know, Armenians, you'll hear the word Artsakh, but I personally go with Nagorno-Karabakh, which is its Soviet name. It was actually originally the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. Very, very geeky, sort of like foreign policy 101 college class thing you'd learn. So it used to be a semi-autonomous thing of its own within the Soviet Union, assigned to Azerbaijan. So now for the people who live there and who have been there for generations, centuries, you know, this is home. And for them, it went from Soviet rule to independence. You know, that's almost like, for them, it's almost like the Boston Tea Party meets the Revolutionary War meets State Building 101. So they have a parliament, they have a university, they have a free press, you know, they have a thing going on. And so they don't want to lose it. And for them, they don't trust. So all these peace negotiations until now, over the course of 30 years, that presuppose a reintegration of these two people have never really addressed the question of how the two sides are going to feel safe around one another.
Yeah.
And so it was, they call it a frozen conflict. I don't know if it was, I don't know if it's really fair. It's been pretty hot in people's minds. But there wasn't anything like what we've seen in the past 2 weeks, where cities are being hit, civilian casualties, all out war basically for the past 14, 15 days. And so now basically it was an opportune moment. Turkey and Azerbaijan want to, they're tired of the negotiations track. They don't believe they're going to get Karabakh back that way. And so they have said expressly that they want to answer the question for good on the ground. And so that's where we're at.
When you mentioned that it was an opportune moment, that opportune moment kind of is a litany of kind of things that are happening. One is the pandemic, which Erdogan has capitalized on. And
yeah, well, it's made it harder for diplomats to move around. So if you want to be kind to the international community responsible for keeping this from blowing up, you know, they made their efforts. They say, oh, the two sides, they want to fight. We can't stop them from fighting. They won't agree on things. So you have a negotiations track that's been alive since, I believe it was 92. I have to double check whether it was started, at what point it was started. But it's called the OSCE Minsk Group. Quick check of their website and I'll get you which year it was founded. But over this whole period, they have tried to find a negotiated settlement to the solution. The peak of it was a Key West summit in 2001, sort of the peak of American diplomacy. They bring everyone to this beautiful tropical destination and makes a little bit of progress, right? But then 9/11 happens and America kind of goes quiet in terms of its role. It sort of had built this negotiations process with a strong America at the center. It's co-led by the US, Russia, and France, but it really depended on very robust US leadership in the form of diplomats flying and high-level summits at Key West and things like that. So the US sort of slowly walked back its participation. France was always a bit of it was involved, but not really in the driver's seat. And so it's been outsourced to Russia and Turkey. And Turkey and Russia are now basically in the driver's seat over what happens next. And that doesn't do well. Didn't do well with Syria. It's not doing well with Libya. And that's where we are.
yes,
But
so
the ceasefire, I mean, I should mention, a ceasefire was attempted on Saturday, but it never began. Someone from the humanitarian community who was frankly would have been tasked to go retrieve bodies. So that close to the process told me last night that the ceasefire never started for them to go do that even.
So when we're talking about this, you know, I think for people that are outside of the region or kind of outside of focusing on that kind of part of the world, I think that there's an overview of like, you know, okay, fine, it's some, you know, former Russian, you know, republics. Cares also, but you know, but really, I think what people are missing is that this really has the potential to pull in a lot of partners and really sets a dangerous stage for a regional war. And we kind of glossed over in the beginning kind of the goals of pan-Turkic diplomacy and what that might mean. But I think I'd really love to hear a little bit about what is going on and what's at stake for this region, and
Yeah.
whether or not we can really have a war. And at the end of that, Lara, I'd love to hear, well, I'll get to it, about what we can do.
So when I started reporting on this, just after it broke, my thought was, there's 150,000 lives at stake. That's the population of Nagorno-Karabakh. That is true. But this has escalated faster than anyone would have imagined. And so in retaliation for strikes on Karabakh, we've now seen Armenian strikes on Ganja, which is the second largest city in Azerbaijan. There is a huge fog around the facts. This is one of the biggest challenges covering this. So Azerbaijan won't release military casualty numbers. Armenians have released them. Some diplomats I speak to think it's worse than they're saying. Casualties, but casualties are now not only on both sides by the hundreds, if not thousands, but civilian populations in major cities of these two countries, including where I sit right now, cannot be shocked if missile starts flying overhead. It has gone that far already. And so part of the reason the ceasefires don't seem to be working is, yes, Azerbaijan and Turkey have made it very clear they in their own words, they want to keep fighting until they take back this piece of land, or at least some of the areas around it, but something to show there, also, frankly, to show a win. They've promised it domestically, they've promised it, Erdogan has sort of promised it to the Turkic world to have a win come out of this. And also because the nature of the war itself, I'm working on research around the impact of drones in this fight. Tremendous escalation.
And those drones have come from where? Well,
they've come from Israel and Turkey, but part of my reporting on this, yes, there's a lot of uproar here that Israel ought to stop selling those weapons if they're going to be used this way. Canada stopped exporting military technology to Turkey for drones, seeing that it was used in this conflict. But that's really a complicated story, and it's why I'm spending so many days working on it, because the way things are now. One analyst I spoke to, it's not a secret, I should make sure I attribute the right one. He called Nagorno-Karabakh a giant commercial for remote warfare. So drones have made such a huge impact, and Azerbaijan has superior wealth and superior oil resources, and they have superior technology and drones as a result. So it's given them enough of an advantage that I have a hunch it seems it really disincentivizes going back to negotiations, because it lowers the human cost and the political cost. I mean, there are casualties, no doubt, on the Azerbaijani side and in the military of Azerbaijan, but drone warfare changes the decision-making, right? It changes the easiness of moving things forward, or at least trying, or softening a target, or laying siege to an area. So these drones are used on civilian areas. They're not fighting on the front line. This is not about the line of contact, as they call it. These are flying over cities and civilian areas, over hospitals. And there are different kinds of drones. One of the European diplomats I interviewed referred to it as, her words, a Star Wars nightmare, like drones overhead firing on the ground 24/7, including suicide drones. You hear them buzzing, they're going to come in and hit, and you just don't know if you're going to get whacked. So it's really devastating.
Bombs as well, they're saying too.
Yes. Well, Amnesty's documented on the Azeri side. I look for documentation around the Armenian side. Azeris say the Armenians are using it too. Again, there's a huge fog of facts. I am not there in Azerbaijan to check. I kind of wish I would, but it's not, I have to deal with this as well, to try to get a hold. But it's very hard. I mean, right now, the only real narrative of facts on the ground in terms of the battle are either coming from the Armenian or the Azerbaijani side. It's very hard to independently verify. Even the international observers, other than knowing that it's something's still being shelled, or that a rocket landed in Ganja in Azerbaijan, it's very hard to tell. And it's very aggressive posturing, huge. There's a PhD or 3 to be written on the information wars around this conflict.
Yeah.
Claims of having taken place, but then it's actually still not really, and they got taken back. And so some of it's deliberate, some of it's just messy. But there's no doubt that this is escalating. And the mutually assured destruction scenario that was always described to me was, well, Armenia can hit other parts of Azerbaijan. It can hit oil and gas infrastructure. It can hit water infrastructure. And Azerbaijan can hit anywhere else in Armenia, including they threatened in July to hit the nuclear power plant, which is terrifying. I mean, I bought thyroid blocker pills for my kids just in case. So you have to contend with how bad this can get. Yeah. And if you stay, you know that you're in a war zone now. It's just crazy. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't have expected it.
Yeah, and when we're talking about kind of, again, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the neighboring countries and who could get pulled into this, because I know Russia is teetering, in terms of sides and interests, as is Iran. And I kind of want to see what your vision is in terms of how the various ways these could play out.
So in terms of how it plays out militarily, unfortunately, the only way up is the way I described, which is more attacks on territorial, non-Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, which is devastating for both of these countries. In terms of international participation, so I'm reporting out this sort of drones angle, but this is the era of such warfare now. It is the era of drone warfare. And so the truth is, if Israel doesn't sell it, someone else might. A lot of countries make this technology now. Turkey has a huge indigenous capacity to create these drones, maybe not the exact same kinds or sophistication, but the whole field of this sort of weaponry is moving forward. And so it's hard to tell who comes in on that level. Sometimes there are murmurs, Ukraine's coming in on the Azeri side. But then Ukraine said, no, they're not. And what about Kazakhstan? I mean, the randomest pileup. The first few days were like a random pileup. I think it's been a tremendously important angle. Now, it's not just, oh, Turkey's a bully in the region, and let's all cover how it's a bully. No, it's not that. It's the real rise of Turkey's influence in this region and involvement in a lot of conflict theaters by their own will and by their own statements. I mean, 11 years ago, 2009, they were on the brink of making peace, Turkey and Armenia. It was called the Zurich Protocols, right? So just 10 years ago, Turkey was talking about being sort of this peacemaking commercial giant in the region. And it's taking a different approach now. For whatever reason, it is more of a militarized presence, but that's a done deal. So in terms of regionalization, it's a done deal. I do not have an easy time parsing the tit for tat. Some say there are Syrian mercenaries fighting for the Azeri side. The Turks say Yazidis and PKK are fighting on the Armenian side. The Yazidis were a very interesting reference because they actually live in Armenia. Like there are Yazidi villages in Armenia. So there are Armenian Yazidis. So I haven't put that in print until I can absolutely nail it down myself. Even the videos, even the claims. Syrian Observatory, a group I really, really admire, has come out with reporting on the use of Syrian mercenaries, Turkey flying them in. But there are others. There's a Syrian rights organization I worked with a lot covering the Syrian conflict. They have started publishing and started validating when they really put out a report, and they put out their first part, and the other part's coming out in the next week or two. That I take seriously. When Syrians are documenting the use of Syrians in this conflict, that's something I take really seriously. The rest I have to chase down. But to your question, whether it's major powers, Russia, Turkey, or these minorities that don't usually pop up in war, in context of war, it's a very, very big pylon. Mm-hmm. Russia's trying to play both sides, but I don't know how that'll work.
And I think one thing that's really interesting, and I know is a huge challenge for you in this, Lara, is that you're Armenian, but you're also a very serious, well-respected reporter. And I know it's tough to balance these kinds of both sides of this. I'd love to hear just a little bit about your experiences and the challenges of covering this, and then what you observe as being how this is being reported from Azerbaijan.
Two great questions. So when this broke, and I came here to do volunteer work. I was helping the American University Design and Media Lab. Like, this was not what I thought I was doing when I came here during COVID. I thought it would be a nice place to, spend the COVID year. And so as soon as it broke, it triggered all of the conflict coverage and peace building journalism I've done in my life. At the same time, I could feel, well, I have spent a lifetime exposed to a lot of voices on one side of this. I never held a particular opinion on how this should be resolved in the end, but I've been really exposed to arguments on how it should be and then how people feel about it. So I had to do a lot of diligence, and it was probably the hardest story I've ever covered for that reason. First, because I had a lot of catching up to do, and I started reaching out. I had like a 50% hit rate of Azerbaijanis that I would reach and who would be willing to talk to me. And I have had now with a few of them, multiple amazing conversations, understanding their take on this. And it's not like anything I had heard from the Armenian side. But at the end of each conversation, knowing that these sides are too far apart for an easy resolution was devastating, because I know this region intimately. I know what it means. And I know how bad it can get as a conflict. So it was really different to kind of bear witness to something where you know how bad it can be for the people involved on both sides. So, you know, I'm going to keep blitzing and literally cold call Azerbaijanis who were quoted in the press now. A lot of them are the same ones again and again, but I found some really great voices on Twitter also. So one was sort of exposing yourself deliberately to make up for just circumstantially being really exposed to another side of it. When I sat down to write, it was amazing how surgical it was, you know? It was a really, that part of me, that muscle memory of doing journalism just guided the whole thing. The first piece I published was in the New York Times, and it was annotated. It's their policy for an op-ed of any kind, but the annotations were so dense for me. This came from here, this came from here, and I was really assiduous, and I told them to be really brutal if they saw any daylight for sort of not tight enough attribution and annotation in terms of the sourcing. I used geeky history books that were not written by Azerbaijanis or Armenians. They were written by geeky Americans who just took an interest in this part of the world. But that's it. I mean, it's very hard. And now that I'm exposing myself to more of the Azerbaijani voices on Twitter, I'm seeing also the picture of an Armenian soldier next to a really similarly aged Azerbaijani soldier who died around the same day. It's really easy to be compassionate, frankly, across the board. But it's been hard to live through, because I know both people on both sides, if this goes on, are willing to fight to their last drop of blood. And I know that because I know them so intimately. And that's really hard to hold.
And to look at what the potential is for this situation, and can't be emphasized enough. And your op-ed in the New York Times is really interesting as it continues to make the rounds, because I think that you're asking for the US to really step up.
Yes. And I'm sort of calling them out, because I think, and that was interesting, because I don't give myself credit for it, but it's been really interesting. There was like a 48-hour arc where a lot of what was written was about the US absence, op-eds and reporting. I think it's been that glaring, you know? And I didn't write it thinking that the US would necessarily move on this more vigorously. I think it should be said that, you know, there's one thing to be, and put in the piece, it's one thing to be the world's policeman at great cost. It's another thing to just deploy an envoy and use the leverage.
US kind of taking has been a hands-off approach for a few years. It's not, you know, it's about the last decade roughly, but this right now seems egregious.
I mean, not me talking, this wonderful guy, Tom DeWall from Carnegie Europe talking, you know, President Trump has really thick business ties with Turkey and with Azerbaijan, and he may see this through that lens of just not wanting to get involved, and if they want to fight, let them fight. He also seems very content to let both Erdogan and Putin run the region the way they see fit. So this is not like a criticism of the man for being critical of the man. This is how he has chosen to let this region roll now. And so that is very different. I mean, John Kerry made this, I don't know if it was how vigorous it was, but made this sort of pop up during the Obama years to say, we're going to solve this, we're going to sit down and solve this Nagorno-Karabakh thing. But since then, it's been a pretty deliberate, you know, you guys do what you want, it's fine. And it will come at the expense of human lives and potentially at a huge cost, you know, to both countries.
And part of that cost too, I think, and what you kind of hit on earlier, is that there's a huge, and I'm really hesitant to kind of use this word, but there's huge propaganda on both sides, you know, and I think that, you know, the Armenian community especially is extremely tight-knit, and they have large enclaves outside of the United States, and they've really been able to rally around the world in different ways. And I know that Azerbaijan's infrastructure isn't such that, and that that President Aliyev is a bit more strict, shall we say, with press and media. So I'm wondering, you know, in that mix, when we're looking at the kind of propaganda wars too, how do you see that?
It poses several fascinating problems, honestly. So I'll start on the Azerbaijani side and then spend more time on the Armenian side, because they're equally interesting and problematic for a reporter, for me like right now. So on the Azerbaijani side, they restrict. Well, there's been a huge investment. This conflict, this war, this round, this has been the fruits of a long-term investment by Azerbaijan and by the Aliyevs to have strategic communications capacity. So they have done a masterful job, frankly, investing in stratcoms, strategic communications, in people who represent their point of view, in media training. They seem to be very, very good at that. On the flip side, they restricted very severely internet bandwidth and access to social media after this fight broke. Actually, just before it, Saturday night, Azerbaijanis tell me, as of Saturday night before the war began, they started experiencing connectivity limitations. And so they've come out and said this is because we don't want hackers. It didn't really quite make sense but it was clearly a sort of way to narrow the narrative to the official line only. And then since then, what you do hear from the Azerbaijani side is, very boosterish, obviously. And so I can't fact check everything they made about what they took down or what they did, or, but there's a lot there, so basically this very safe way to describe it is playing up any wins and minimizing any losses, if not letting them go off completely. So you can't really read the conflict that well unless you really can fact check and understand why this might have been said. You can't really get that. But then you've got a really strong, the first 2 days I got tweeted at with like the same lines from a lot of different people. And I was like, you guys are all really good friends? Well, you've thought about this. So that's that. On the Armenian side, of course, a lot of boosterism, of course. And then a lot of narratives. And it's true, Armenians do want peace. Armenians want peace. They do want peace. But that's also because peace is part of the status quo, whereby they won in '94 and they basically have a functioning independent society in Karabakh, right? So they want peace, but they kind of want what they have now forever. And that's not, Azerbaijan is going to keep coming at it until so it's really hard to square that. But then a lot of references to the genocide, a lot of emotional stuff, of course, in these protests. I think raising the effort of especially the Armenian American, roadblock in LA, all the way to walk in New York, to 1,000, I understand, cars in Montreal, back to back, it was about raising the profile of the issue that would frankly otherwise go quiet. So if you read it that way, it's effective in terms of making it known this is an issue. But it's very hard for me, and I found my strategies basically, post the piece. It's like every reporter, you go down to file your piece, you write, you come up for air, you've missed a bunch of things, you try to catch up. But this time after it posts, I basically ignore the comment section completely. My husband monitors it for any personal threats that I need to take seriously. And that's not to be smarmy, like I genuinely, I don't like, honey, you read it so I can.
I know you well enough to know how many times in your life you've been in that scenario. It's actually necessary with some of your reports.
I know, and I've been cyber attacked multiple times from Turkish cyber arms. I mean, I wish I weren't. There are Turks I love so much. I love going to Turkey. I love my Turkish friends, but I also have to be not dumb about, how fierce this can be. Mm-hmm. And so he checks, and then I don't really engage social media except the accounts. I'm going to make public a list on Twitter that I think is really worthwhile for everyone to follow, experts and Azerbaijani voices. And if I find them, great Armenian voices, but not official, not the official MOD of one country or the other, just to get more insight than bluster. But it's hard because there are people I do love in this world who are Armenian, who are close to me, who if they're on the advocacy side of it or they're planning a protest, I basically just have to let their message go quiet. Oh, hey, can you? No, that's not what I do. I now today, as of September 27, I'm actively reporting on something, and you are actively on the advocacy side. I've never really been on the advocacy side. I've done a lot of economic development or educational or capacity building, journalism development in the Armenian context, environmental stuff. I mean, that's what I basically wanted to work on here. Mm-hmm. But I have to sort of take a lot of people I know and just put them in a little bubble over there because they're doing advocacy, and that's not what I do. And what I do is not part of what they do, nor should it be. But you do know there are people very emotional reading your articles, probably on both sides. I just hear from the Armenian side. If I write an article, they're reading it for things that encourage or discourage them. or that they might take issue with. Why did you say there were this many refugees? There were only this many. Like, you know, you can overcount it or undercount it. I used the New York Times own reporting because I was writing for the New York Times. And they said 600,000, you know, Azerbaijanis, probably the surrounding areas, you know, that's what we're going with. So it's been a really, you know, and so I actually have written something, a message, a compassionate message for every Armenian I know who might write me with a complaint about a word choice or a fact or figure. Again, I'm annotating the, you know, patootie out of everything I write. So I can point to it and I say, thank you, I really appreciate the thoughts. Thank you, I really appreciate it. That's it. You know, there will be no wrestling with in my life, as much as I might love someone, with how they feel about what I said or didn't say based on what I see and I assess. And it's hard because on the Armenian side, there's a lot of boosterism and they don't want defeatist thinking and they don't want to, neither side wants defeatist thinking. They all want to all feel like they're winning so that their populations stay in and not discouraged and their energies don't drop. And Azerbaijan has a much tighter control over that because they have much tighter control over that. A lot of journalists are here because they weren't allowed in there, although the BBC's over there, so maybe something's changed. But this has been the sort of forward operating center for a lot of foreign journalists. Yeah. And that also means that it's, you know, they're going to write what they, as best they can. And you can't sit there as any party to the conflict and just spend time, well, I don't think you can, clearly they can, just sit there and be like, well, why did the NPR use this word? And why did they use this word? And they come to me like, okay, you can have that reaction if you'd like, but there's no answer for that. You know, journalists will have to say, why did they use separatists? Okay, well, technically they are separatists. They didn't decide to separate yesterday. They are a majority democratic statelet that, you know, has asked for this since at least 1964 on paper when they petitioned the Kremlin to be reassigned to Armenia. And before that, they were not thrilled about it in the 20s. So, you know, they have wanted this for a really long time. And if you care about self-determination, if you care about the protection of the people who live there, you'll have a thought or two about not just throwing it back into the majority where they don't feel safe, and where both sides for 30 years have been taught that the other is an enemy. I had one Armenian analyst, I'm trying to push them, like, you know, what's Armenia going to be able to give back? And and he said, you know, Armenians take it as a given that if this is reintegrated into Azerbaijan, they'll all be slaughtered. And that every time there's been a civilian within reach of an Azerbaijani, they've been slaughtered. And so I put that to an Azerbaijani, really lovely gal, analyst, journalist, smart person. I said, well, what do you make of that? And she said, I don't think they're wrong to worry. Mm-hmm. They're not wrong to worry. You know, this is a real possibility. And so if you're Armenia or you're Armenian anywhere in the world, and you're pretty sure that another 150,000 people in your ethnic group are going to be killed, you're going to mobilize and try to prevent that from happening. And then as a political science person, I have to try to imagine, well, what are the different mechanisms we as a species have come up with to deal with a situation like this? Mm-hmm. The answer is we haven't come up with a lot, frankly. And when I speak to some of the European diplomats, some of them are just like, well, I don't know what we're going to do. We're just going to, someone's going to have to win on the ground. But that doesn't work either, because if the Armenians prevail, it's pretty sure the Azerbaijanis and the Turks with them will come back for another round of the fight. If Azerbaijan takes the ground, it would be really hard because there are a lot of people ready to give their last drop of blood. So it's not going to be easy to hold. And if it were, I don't know how. I don't know that the Armenians would stop fighting either. Yeah. It's going to have to be. The one thing I'll say as a journalist, the one time I have thought of compromising my journalism is if I ever got asked to work on this as a peace builder, I'd have a really hard time with that decision. I'd have to really consider whether it's time to be more active that way in trying to build bridges and take some of the heat out of the system that I can see. I think there are a lot of creative solutions. Again, as a political scientist, I think there are a lot of creative solutions that haven't been tried, you know, and really subtle ones, you know. There are, part of what bothers Armenians so much is that lands that now belong to Turkey or Azerbaijan, they've slowly erased a lot of the heritage or renamed or said that this was such and such, not recognizing sort of the architects of this monastery.
Architecture in some areas, right? That some of that
there are churches that are now banned,
right? So
I mean, everybody got very worked up in my community about Hagia Sophia being converted to a mosque. I didn't. That's my personal take. If they're asking for my personal opinion, I think if it's used as a house of God, I feel pretty, believe in equal access. It broke my heart when I was covering Syria and I went to Cordoba for a project, and you see mosques where the sign says only Christian prayer is allowed here. Like, that's not cool. That's not cool. So that's me. But like, I also recognize that, there are churches, former churches in Turkey, Armenian churches, they're now barns. Like, I wouldn't mind at all seeing them used as mosques, but like, to recognize the sacredness of another culture's sites, or to not do so as a political tool or as a demoralization tool, like, that's not necessary. Like, so if I were ever asked, and I haven't been, but that's the one time I'd have to question whether it's time for me to step out of the journalist role and try to be a peace builder. Mm-hmm. But I will not step out just to fight an information war.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's trying to straddle that line, because you got to get through so much of these information wars and what's happening now. But really, we share that sometimes, that human rights lens or that peace building lens is so rarely tried, it feels like, these days, and especially using innovative approaches. Lara, we've collected some questions leading up to this, so I want to get through to make sure that I do right by the people that have asked, and some of them might have been asked before. One is that The Spectator has done an interview with Hikmet Hajiev, assistant to the president of Azerbaijan and the head of foreign policy affairs for the administration. He claims that Armenia attacked around 6 a.m. on September 27, 2020. They have researched this claim as far as the person who's asking the question could find, that this is not true. Do you have any information relevant to this?
I have a really hard time with minute-by-minute battle reports from either Azerbaijan or Armenia, because I cannot verify them and I cannot be around others who do. A lot of analysts say the war started with a very heavy offensive by Azerbaijani troops all along the line of contact, so all along the sort of frozen front line. I wrote for Foreign Policy that we woke up Sunday morning, my kids, or my funny little alarm clocks, at 6:30, 7 a.m. in the morning, so I guess directly linked. We couldn't get on our home internet. And I was trying to figure out why, and our home internet had been hacked, and the name of the Wi-Fi had been changed to Karabakh is Azerbaijan, which is a quote from Ilham Aliyev. There was like, it's Karabakh is Azerbaijan, Karabakh is Armenia. It's been like a war of words. So this sort of nugget of like a declaration of war was placed on my home Wi-Fi router by 6:37 a.m. that day. And so I have not met Hikmet Hajiev. He's certainly very vocal, and I try to read everything I can of what he says. It's important. He's a spokesperson of Azerbaijan at the moment. Not an official, but he's a high-level official talking about the conflict. I find it a little hard to believe the Armenians started this, because it's such terrible timing for them, and there's such a technology and weapons gap between the two sides. They could not have wished this upon themselves, frankly. And I don't think they underestimated. They were very happy with the frozen equilibrium, frankly, which was, there are generally more Azerbaijanis. It's a country of 9.6 million people. They have much more money, a lot of oil money, really good weapons. But Armenians have a couple of, assets. They've got some weapons. They've got people who are very fervent. And they're on top of this Nagorno-Karabakh mountainous area that's very, 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 very hard to reach. And so I'm giving away some of my research for this drone article, but one of the drone experts I spoke to is basically what the drones have meant is, instead of having that equilibrium where one side has geography and the other side has heavier arsenal, the drones have obviously an easier time climbing uphill, getting over those cities, and attriting, their words, not mine, attriting the Armenian forces. And so the drones have meant that the Armenians' geographic advantage is less stable, and it does a ton of damage on the cities of that region and the populations. It's moved about 90% of the civilians out now, and has created a really messy, bloody war on the ground. So it would be a bit implausible for Armenians to wish that upon themselves, but I don't know for sure. I cannot say for sure. And in my reporting, I do not use words that would denote levels of detail I do not have. However, there's still so much to cover, even if you're just staying directionally aware of where the conflict is. There's a big article I'm working on how these two sides can live together again. because it's presupposed by the negotiations. This drone article, there's so much to write about already that you can live with yourself not being so specific, but still remaining as accurate as you want to be.
Another question that has come, that we've collected is, how many journalists that you know of are covering the conflict firsthand? And what is your view about their level of knowledge?
I think a lot of the journalists who've been sent here are very aware. And it didn't take that much to get caught up, honestly. If you listen to the right people, Tom DeWall at Carnegie, all the folks at Crisis Group, you can put together a good script and a good article. And so I don't actually know a lot of the journalists who've been assigned to this region, because my press corps was always out of Beirut and Dubai, or those covering Israel and Jerusalem. And so I don't know this crowd as well. Although there's one guy tweeting, Neil Hauser, let me make sure I get it right. And I've really enjoyed his tweets. They've helped me make sense of the government line on each side. And so I just wrote to him just to say hello and thanks for your reporting. And he said, thanks, I really enjoyed writing for Syria Deeply back in the day. I was like, hey, his name is Neil Hauer, Neil P. Hauer on Twitter. He'll be on the list that I made public. So, so that's been interesting to watch as well.
Yeah. And then what sort of pressure Armenian journalists feel to report a certain way on the conflict? I've been struck by the pressure I felt from that community, and I'm not even Armenian, says one journalist.
So two different branches of the answer. So one is, I don't feel any pressure to report it anyway. At the same time, I do have a lot of trust in those people. And after I report, I might hear a thing or two that, why did you use that figure? You didn't mention this point, So that's one thing. But I've done a lot of engagement with journalists here in Armenia, and most news outlets that are here now that are Armenian, of course, they're operating right now as the national press. So if they were before quite critical thinkers about the politics or the democratic transition in Armenia, now they are much more like the national press. And I understand that. And that's why, probably I can't write for them, because they're operating more in that, through that lens. For non-Armenian journalists writing about this and hearing a lot from Armenians, I think it's probably going to hear from a lot of Azerbaijanis too at some point, because they're very active on Twitter and a lot of other places. My advice would just be, if they want you to, frankly, maybe filter it out and go to a lot of the experts on this, including Armenian experts. One of the old negotiators on this, Yerevan is unbelievable and very sensible. So find the sensible Armenian voices, and the other is just, frankly, I don't think it's wrong to hear those messages out to see if there's any nut in there that might have been missed. It can be interesting, but it's what you want to report on is probably not what they're messaging you about. Because if someone sitting in Glendale doesn't have intimate understanding of what the drones are doing on the ground, right. Or this or that. But if you want, but to write about the existential fear of Armenians is also a real angle. And I think it does sensitize you to the, frankly, interests of your readers. If they want to hear about this story, those editors should keep assigning stories on it. Not in any one direction or the other, but, people want to know what's going on and how it's going to resolve.
Yeah. And if people want to follow and kind of bring themselves up to date on some Azerbaijani voices on this, critical and otherwise, who are some people that you follow that?
One that's been the touchstone for me is Zaur Shirayev from the Crisis Group. And his if you just look for Crisis Group, Karabakh, he and his colleague, the Armenian analyst, Olesia Vardanyan, they are both just tremendous. And Zaur has been very generous with his time in the reporting that I've done. I've referred him to other journalists. He's in Baku. He's much closer, I think, to understanding what the leadership there is thinking. But he also seems to have a lot of time for people like us. And he's very prolific on Twitter. So his commentary on Twitter. So Zaur Shirayev, or just look for the Crisis Group guy in Baku, International Crisis Group guy in Baku.
And we're going to wrap up soon, Lara, but I want to ask, kind of in a perfect case scenario, weighing in on diplomacy and the different players who could really pressure on this situation. What would you see, from your angle, as how can we put pressure to de-escalate? What can be done to de-escalate in the immediate?
I keep hearing Turkish and Azeri voices say Germany should get involved.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like one of the more sensible things that would happen because they'd have at least some relationship and leverage with Turkey. The US does. That's why people are calling for the US to get involved. It has a relationship and leverage with Turkey and with Azerbaijan. But Trump, if he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to. The next would be Germany or the EU as a whole, just joining the negotiations, because right now, if it's just horse trading, Russia has real strategic interests in maintaining close ties to Azerbaijan. So there isn't a strategic balance of like, oh, well, Russia and Armenia are on one side and Turkey and Azerbaijan are on the other. That's not what it is. So there isn't any sort of, there isn't a mediator, there isn't a balance. We say, oh, well, France and on Armenia's side, France is, sort of like says nice things here and there, doesn't really counterbalance.
They're very busy with Lebanon at the time.
Right, they can do that. So a real equally weighted and set of characters who have the leverage to make a deal happen and to help, frankly, with these creative solutions that are going to make the Armenian side comfortable, making some needed concessions, because it's not going to happen without both sides giving something. And you need to have negotiators who know how to talk to both sides and to provide the guarantees. And so, I think getting Germany involved as another one of the top figures would be really, really useful.
What's Germany's incentive to do it?
The European Union as a whole has said it wants to be more of a problem solver, especially in its backyards. And it has a few. This is one of them. And so the EU has said it wants to be more of a peace builder, more of a geopolitical power. There's a lot of quotes I have from analysts saying, well, EU has to get involved. This is right on their doorstep. I don't see how this will really be a headache for the EU, except that they're sensitive to the loss of life. And there's a strong Armenian
potential refugee crisis.
I don't think they can get that far. I don't think they go in that direction. I think the Armenian refugees come up to Armenia proper. Well, actually, that's not true. I guess, Armenians could try to, I don't know. But I think it's not like Syria that way. It's not going to flood their gates. But if they're sensitive to the loss of life and they don't want nuclear fallout over half of Turkey, because if they hit that power plant, it would spread probably all the way to Ankara.
Yeah.
So there's an incentive for Germany, but they've got their hands full. They've got other things going on. But Merkel did make calls to both countries' leaders in the beginning of the conflict. So maybe they have an appetite to help.
And what about, where do you see NATO in all of this?
It's complicated because Turkey, is accused of taking NATO assets, F-16s, and basically lending them out to Azerbaijan to fight Armenia on this issue, which is not what they were intended for. So even if NATO doesn't have a position and the international community tends toward more national sovereignty arguments for Azerbaijan than self-determination arguments for Armenia, what we saw with Canada was, no, we exported you that drone technology, but not for that. Mm-hmm. That was a really momentous moment in sort of NATO and weapons sharing and sort of stuff like that, or like weapons exporting. So analyzing that more and more to see what that means. I don't think it's going to lead the breakup of NATO, but I don't think it's not helpful. And I don't see them getting involved.
And, I'm not going to let the whole conversation slide without me asking you about your perspective on Iran and all of this and where Iran might be coming in.
I don't have a very close read on Iran in this moment, except they and Russia do not like Syrian mercenaries being brought to their borders. And so I think that's a real trigger. It was a trigger for France as well. They don't like the precedent of Turkey bringing Syrian fighters as mercenaries to basically cannon fodder, basically to prevent more losses of actual Azerbaijani lives. It's not the right use of human beings. It's not the right use of Arab lives. And also they don't like, they've just been fighting these people in Syria for a while. They don't like them coming home here. So I don't know what that will trigger. But, I think Iran's been playing a really delicate balance. And we'll see if something tips it into a different kind of participation.
Lara, there's a lot of people that are, thank you for that. I think, and I feel the same way for what it's worth. I think Iran's kind of stuck, as a friend put it to me, kind of in a tent right now and doesn't quite know whether they should come out or not. So I think that one question maybe people that are watching and will watch this have is that what can they do, both on the Armenian side and the Azerbaijani side, as members of the international community? What are people within both of these borders asking of international community? And what, if people want to support, is the best way to do so?
I am of the mind that international engagement for a ceasefire is urgent and essential. And so, as always, for every story I've covered, I'm an advocate for the story itself, not for any one outcome. And so I personally would encourage everyone to stay sensitive to this. I will open up a Twitter list of great people to follow. My Twitter handle is just @Lara, L-A-R-A. Amplify them, keep following, these are people, top minds, crisis group, Carnegie, peace building types, they're not putting out bluster, and so follow that list I'm going to put up on Twitter. Cover this if you'd like. Reach me anytime I can be helpful from here. I'm one of those reporters who likes sharing. So I'll, contacts or analyst names and stuff.
I can attest to that.
Thank you. So others have done it for me, and I could, especially covering Iran, a lot of it with the greats, Scott Peterson, others, they were always very generous with their knowledge and helped me cover these issues before I understood them. And so, keep covering it, keep paying attention to it. I would say advocate for a ceasefire. There are official voices in Azerbaijan who think advocating for a ceasefire just means protecting Armenians. They want to keep fighting. They don't want a ceasefire until the concessions are made and the land is handed, some land is handed back. So it's hard. It's a little bit, even asking for a ceasefire now is a bit politicized. But I personally think it is right to do so and to stop the shed of human lives. It's a huge human cost on both sides. And it's not going to be pretty if it keeps escalating.
There's one question that has come in asking, and I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but I'll let me phrase it to a different way. I saw that you had shared somewhere, maybe even just with me privately, that there was a misinformation type campaign where people were asking for funds for Armenia to help Armenia.
Yeah.
And there was like a typo and the funds were being misappropriated to potential Azerbaijani things. So the question is really, how can people donate for those who want to donate? And I know that you can't necessarily in your journalistic.
I mean, I wouldn't push any Armenian charity because it's not right for me to do so. I think, having said
that, I'd be curious about how that, it's part of that misinformation campaign. It's
but the first thing is, I would say is the Red Cross is standing by to pick up bodies, literally, the minute the fighting stops. They're going to be doing important work here. So if you want to donate, the Red Cross is never a bad idea.
International Red Cross.
Sorry? International Red Cross, yeah. And it's very vivid. I mean, I was sitting with this woman and her daughter. I mean, she didn't say it was off the record, but I don't want to give her away. But, in a casual setting, and knowing that she and her colleagues in Stepanakert in Nagorno-Karabakh are going to have to do that very difficult and very physical work of picking up bodies. And it's a very vivid way of imagining someone being tasked to do a thing. But then there's a huge cyber. There have been a lot of cyber dimensions of this. I told you my house internet was hacked. A lot of cyber attacks and a lot of misinformation. And yes, Azerbaijanis cloned one of the bigger Armenian charity sites and redirected people to donate their money into a different box, which I don't know where that money went. It was freaky. It creeps people out. This stuff, the cyber stuff really is very creepy. And the drone stuff is very creepy. And it's being done masterfully and very meticulously. I guess it's probably something I'll have to cover at some point, the cyber dimension. But
you again, I have this years ago. I think we had a long conversation once about an article Seymour Hersh had written in the New Yorker about the future of technological warfare, kind of digital warfare. Do you think we're there? No?
It's really scary. I don't know what to do. I don't know, as a responsible parent, I don't know how you do it. I always imagined I'd be like a single journalist, always able to be in harm's way. But now that the world is careening in this direction, it's very scary for those of us who have kids to imagine where things go, and and where you'll find refuge, because this was a really calm, and it will be one day when this is over, but it was a calm and safe, family-friendly destination a month ago.
Yeah, why you chose it.
And what will it be anywhere else? What will it be? Who could come for Canada? Someone could come for their water. Like anything can happen anywhere. Anyone who knows the Middle East or has lived in it knows that.
Yeah.
And so now that that's what the conflict can be, it's very scary.
Lara, I want to, before we wrap up, I would love to hear from you kind of some of your suggestions on how people can stay informed on this topic. Aside from following your reportage, like who else do you follow that you recommend?
Again, the crisis group people, I'm going to make a list. I'm not the best person to follow on this because I will be working articles hard, meticulously, and then publishing them. But I am not going to be minute by minute on Twitter. I can't do both. But I will publish that list.
Maybe AMEJA will post on our Facebook group for that, and if you can share some of your resources and stuff that we'll then retweet and share on there. One other thing I would love to say is also we're so grateful to have you here and to have you as a member and as somebody that's willing to give your time and your expertise to this. So I want to thank you so much for today. And for making time. And I also want, for those that are watching and paying attention to AMEJA, to encourage those of you who are journalists of Middle Eastern background and heritage to kindly join AMEJA by going to our website at www.ameja.org/join, and to stay abreast of our Facebook group and elsewhere for future events and projects. And we would sincerely appreciate it. And Lara, I have a feeling that we're going to revisit these conversations in the coming months. And thank you so much for today's time and for your expertise and for, I know, locking your kids up somewhere so you could have a free minute. I don't know, you see mine in the Yes, so I'm really happy and thankful, and thank you to everyone who got up early on the Pacific side of the United States and stayed up a little late in Yerevan and took time away. So thank you, and I appreciate you.